Welcome back, everyone, to another week at DroneDJ. This week's story, we got some updates for you on the DJI RC, and then also some news about the exposed drone IDs from DJI's Aeroscope. We have a new story on a drone pilot getting fined, and then we'll also have some new drones to share with you. So let's kick off with the DJI RC update. Looks like it's going to be supporting the Air 2S very soon. What are your thoughts, Kirk?
Finally, I think we all kind of expected that to happen eventually after it came to the Mavic 3. I don't know why. I mean, I don't know why it came to the Mavic 3 and not the Air 2S right away. Maybe the testing wise they're limited how many they can test. But I love it that Chinese DJI customer support are the ones who leaked it, which is always funny that
where the information comes from.
And it's always Chinese customer support. It's never like US or European Chinese customer support. It's always the Chinese customer support. It's hilarious. So they always, every single time that there's a leak from customer support.
I think there's a customer support team. They just label, that's the team that's going to take the fall every time.
They get all the information and all of a sudden, like it.
Guess what? We're going to give them the information anyway. We know they're going to leak it, but we'll give it to them anyway.
Oh, embargoed? No, thank you. Yeah, it's coming out. So it was on the 10th, around the 10th. Is when it leaked through customer support that it would be coming soon.
Some point this month.
We were hoping a couple days, but we're still waiting on that firmware update to drop. But earlier this week, we saw images from leakers on Twitter of the combo. Air 2S and RC combo. So my bet is we're probably going to see something similar to the the Mavic and the Mini for lineup. Is that you'll probably see an Air, just the drone, a drone with the N1, and then a drone with the RC. I guess I don't think we're going to see like a Air with a RC Pro. I'm sure you have to get like that separate.
Right, and
which doesn't really make a lot of sense to me.
For someone who's getting a new Air 2S, they're probably going to have, a Fly More kit with the RC controller, right?
Yeah, the RC. I mean, it's definitely for what you're doing with the Air 2S. I mean, it makes sense to have a bundle with the RC Pro for the Mavic 3 because the vast majority of professionals are going to be using that and are going to be buying Mavic 3s versus Air 2S. The Air 2S is a great drone and I love it. Like when they had the was it last week they had the store days. They had the toiletry bag option if you bought like a new drone. And I'm sitting there, I had an Air 2S in my cart and I'm sitting there just like, I don't really need an Air 2S, but man, I really want that toiletry bag. And I kind of begged DJI for one, but they didn't give it to me. It makes sense to have like the RC bundle because it's a really good controller. It's my favorite controller.
And if you're looking for an entry-level drone that that's a little more than Mini 3, right? And you don't want the N1 controller. You don't want to put
the N1 controller
with the N1 controller. Then this is the option to go.
Yeah, the N1 controller is probably the best smartphone controller on the market. However, it's still like you still have to use your smartphone. So having a built-in screen is pretty good.
And we did cover about the leak on Mavic 3 Classic, I believe, just a few weeks ago. We're still waiting to see, when that is coming. And the rumor is still some point in November, right? So pricing is definitely going to be lower than the current Mavic 3. But I'm still waiting to see what the whole combo actually comes out as.
I wrote an article when they announced the Mavic 3 Classic, and I told them it was a terrible idea to just come up with the Air 3. And I think my bet was it would probably be in the $1,300 to $1,400 range. That's kind of the area that they're missing when it comes for drones, because you have the Air and you have the Mini at that similar price point, around $1,000. So that I would bet it would be around like the $1,300 to $1,500 range.
And if you haven't been following, this is DJI's new building in China.
Yes,
so this has been a pretty big year for DJI.
I want to get a tour, even though it looks super cool. I know they would never do. I love how they leaked the Inspire 3 in their image that they showed, one of their drone images. They actually had Inspire 3s like kind of just sitting around in one of the windows that people found. from it. So like I would love to get to where it'd be so
So I mean, considering this, there's definitely, I'm hoping to see some new directions from DJI towards end of the year. Now that they're settling on the new move, right? That's been delaying some of their even production speed for a little bit over the summer.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah, I
hoping
was wondering if
not necessarily new leadership, but maybe some new strategies on just exactly what they're trying to do.
a fresh like kind of look at that. I mean, whenever I worked for a company where we just moved offices, and it was kind of like a whole fresh kind of like nothing changed. Like our strategy didn't change, our management didn't change, but like we kind of all had a
But
new
it's a
like
different,
new motivation,
feel,
new
right? It's a
headspace.
different feel. Yeah.
Yeah, new headspace. Like you kind of get to like a new fresh like kind of like if you were burned out before, you kind of get to have like a whole new new take
Totally.
on things. So
So we'll see what happens in the last quarter of this year. Now, along some more news for DJI, I know some of our viewers were concerned about the data leak, the ID data leak this week. So if you look at when I first looked at the title, I was worried. Oh, 80,000, drone ID exposing data leak. That sounds very serious. But if you actually read through the story, this came from the DJI Aeroscope. And the data wasn't owned by DJI, right? So if you read the official response from DJI down here, as the story knows, this data was not held by DJI, and they don't know who generated it. So report further says the data set does not include any personal identifiable information. So what that means about the FAA remote ID is it just means that it's got, takeoff information. I believe it was saying the location where it had flown, the flight time, etc. So if you use any of those flight tracker app to look at if the plane you're going to, pick up someone from has landed. So essentially flight ID or remote ID, it's almost like that. So it's supposed to give you information without giving you the specifics related to, personal privacy. So that's what DJI is saying. And, but my concern is, if I've been trying to get an Aeroscope for several years, you can no longer get it in North America.
Interesting. It would make sense that they would remove it from the United States. I don't know what the Canada remote ID laws would be, but I know like the United States are going to have
the
remote
official
ID anyways.
reason DJI gave was about the FCC, was about the radio frequency. So that was the official story they give. But if you look at this, so there are 53 devices in United States, and then the others are spread somewhere else. And the data itself is hosted by Amazon Web Services. So my question is, doesn't matter if it's Aeroscope or anything else, because at this point, there are other devices that are trying to, make a solution on scanning the airspace and see what are the drones out there. Just like if you use any flight tracker. Right? If I hold up, I use the Flight Radar 24. If I hold my phone up and even have my camera open and scan the airspace, it's going to tell me any airplanes that actually has transponder out, that choose to have their information out. Right? I can see their heading, I can see their speed, I can see their altitude, I can have their code, right? Their tail code, call sign, all that information, where it took off from, where is it going to. So you can actually have all that information. And what DJI is saying is, hey, yes, this data is leaked, but give it till next year where remote ID is public. All this data will be out there anyway.
Yeah, there was nothing like personally identifiable, like, and it's like their spokesperson said like it's remote ID next year is going to be sharing all this information publicly. I'm sure this happened like 5 years ago, or when Aeroscope first came out. I'm sure this would be like a huge deal because it was intended at that point to be private, but now that it's going to become public, it's kind of like, well, like what can you do? Like, yeah, you could probably go, if you find out who it is, like they can go after them and make sure like it doesn't happen again, but also kind of like, well, next year in September, everyone's gonna have remote ID and everyone's gonna be able to get it.
That's exactly what happened in this case when the student got fined, right, for flying on the Singapore University campus, because that was actually with the assistance of Aeroscope. So
Because they were pretty close to a military airbase. Yes,
yes,
they had an
well,
Aeroscope.
Singapore is fairly small to begin with. If you fly, half of Singapore, you're close to military airbase
That's
anyway.
fair. That makes sense.
But if you look at, so essentially, if you look at here, it was quite an iconic, place to fly. And
I
the
would want to
student,
fly there too.
yeah, so student flew without license, without coordination, and he was located by using the DJI Aeroscope. And as a result, he was actually fined in this case, $3,500 for taking drone photos and videos of his girlfriend. So with this happening, I mean, is this a indication of what could happen next year when remote ID becomes public? Are we going to see more enforcement now that they are able to effectively enforce, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, get this.
Well,
I remember one of the debates
mm-hmm.
in early times of regulation for drones. One of the debates was you always have to prove, right? You have to, like in the court of law, you have to prove that absolutely there's no second doubt that's the person who did it. Well, that's what
Mm-hmm.
the prosecutor is going to try to prove. So the question at that time came down to, so if you caught the person who says they're flying the drone and you did that afterwards, so if you didn't catch them in action, right, then how do you prove if you had video evidence of the drone flying and then you have video evidence of the person? But if you don't have them in the same frame where the person is literally controlling the joysticks to land the drone or control the drone,
Mm-hmm.
how do you prove that was the
and,
person with the controller flying that drone?
and I guess
Because
another
it's remote
question
frequency.
is also who would be the one at fault? Is it the owner of the drone who I mean, if you're flying outside of airspace, you're supposed to have a license, or if you're flying higher than 400 feet, whatever it is it the owner of the drone? Is it the one who's controlling the drone? Is it the one who has the license of the group? So if you are in if you do have a license, you are flying in controlled airspace, and you go outside of where you're supposed to be going, but the person with the license, or is it the one who filed, with LANC for like the air? Are they the one that, like,
It's
who's the
usually
one
the
who I guess would be
usually
the
the
one in
pilot. It's
charge?
usually the pilot in command. It's usually the
Yeah.
person who's
Okay, but
actually
like, what if
flying.
you have two? Like, what if you have two pilots for drones? Is it the one who files, or do they both file? Like, I guess
Well,
that's
okay. I don't
is it?
know about FAA, but I know in Canada
Yeah.
it's you get two levels of fines. So you
Mhm.
can again you can multiple charges, right, in one
Yeah.
infraction. So in Canada, the company who actually runs the operation, the legal entity, would get fined, as well as the pilot in command. And the
Interesting.
two different levels of fines. The company one is higher than the individual one.
Mhm.
But what I'm saying is with Aeroscope or remote ID, it's
Mhm.
removing a lot of the guessing.
Yeah, it
Right.
is.
For example, this one comment about BV loss. Yeah, before it would be difficult to justify BV loss, but let's say if through remote ID, can enforcement see the flight path,
Mhm.
right? And now, as the pilot, your location is identified and the drone's flight path is identified. And if it shows the drone flew, 1-2 kilometers away, then at that point, obviously, it's BV loss. So they
Yeah.
could come enforce you, right?
And I see BV loss. There's going to be some changes coming soon, regulation wise, before we come to remote ID, to make it much easily able to, not necessarily like, maybe one day I'll be a part of your part 107. Similar to the night waiver, something like that. So
We'll
we
see.
could
I
see
mean, that's
that
the
being
same question
simplified in
too.
the
You know what?
future.
That's the same question too. I guess even in vehicles, it's the same thing,
Mhm.
right? Like if I use the navigation system, it's actually tracking. It's tracking, like even as simple as if I use Waze or Google Maps, it's actually tracking my speed.
Yeah.
So would they be the enforcement had to come in with a reasonable, justification? They can't just come in to ask you for your data without any justification, right? Same thing as your iPhone. Like Apple wouldn't just give out user data. So I think there's a lot to be figured out when remote ID actually comes out next year. What what domino effects this is going to have, right? So moving along that story about law enforcement, we also have another law enforcement story on Ohio's Sheriff Force is actually
Mhm.
to swap its helicopters for enlarged drone fleet. And Kirk, you were actually saying earlier about this story on the quietness, just to compare the noise level between
Oh
drones
my
and
gosh, yeah, I
helicopters.
was super impressed when I saw the M30 fly. So we were okay. So it was where we were in Vegas. We were right on the. I'm trying to think. We were on the west side of the strip. it's weird because I feel like it's the southeast side of the strip, but I think we're in the northwest side of the strip. And pretty much there's helicopter tours all day long, like going every 30 seconds, I feel like, or every maybe every 2-3 minutes. And there's on one side of the strip they go north, on one side of the strip they go south, and so just continuously helicopters flying overhead. So you can they're pretty loud, and if you watch the video, you'll see one fly over. And so they were limited to airspace. They were limited to a height. I think it felt like it was probably around 50 or so, or maybe close to like 75 feet. And once it took off, like you hear it when you took off, but once it got up to its altitude where it was flying around the hotel, never heard it. Didn't hear it once, unless it was flying overhead.
And you have ambient noise too, right?
Yeah, we had a little bit of ambient noise was going, but like I'm imagining this being used by police force at like 150 feet with the zoom and the thermal. And for law enforcement wise, I mean, if you're talking search and rescue, it doesn't matter about quietness, but we're talking about you kind of don't want to be heard. Maybe you're tracking a subject or something like that. They're not going to be here. They're not going to hear you like at all. Like this thing's going to be super quiet. I mean, maybe you'll see the flashing lights, but even then, like the flashing lights are pretty. You know what you're looking for.
But helicopters, you can definitely
helicopters. You'll hear them all. You'll hear those all day long. Yeah. So
just for that reason, I can see why. I mean, pricing and workflow and everything else aside, right? Risk factors, everything else aside, just the noise level itself.
Much cheaper to train a patrol officer to get a Part 107, and become a drone pilot than it is to find someone to be a helicopter pilot. Like it just makes so much sense. I mean, you'll never get away from not having large scale helicopters. Like I spoke to, I'm trying to think of what department. I think it was San Antonio, somewhere in Texas. And he is he's a pilot, and he's the only pilot for their department. And like he works like 80-hour weeks. And like he's like, dude, the drones are just so much easier. I just like I've been training it, and I can just train someone else in like 2 weeks, and then we have a drone. Now we've doubled our workforce. You train 2 more people, and you double your workforce again. So it just makes so much sense for law enforcement agencies to do this. It'll save so much money.
It's the accessibility to technologies, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just the maneuvers, making things smaller, making things greater. I mean, I know some people are saying Moore's law is dead, but I feel like it's still kicking in some industries.
Well, along some of the other news, I did go see Helios 3 this week and actually got a chance to fly it. So it was actually a really interesting drone because oftentimes we think about flying outside, right? And one of the reasons I went to see Helios 3 is because one of my clients asked me, hey, what if I just fly Avata, just the DJI Avata in tunnels, right? If I need to see things in tunnels, or, the other situations is one of my pilots flies for demolition, for all of the large demolition in Canada. And one of the challenges they have is, so they rig all the explosives, especially most of the time they're dealing with towers, which is easier to demolish because you're almost doing it like cutting the trees and let the tower fall down. But when they're demolishing buildings, remember in Lethal Weapon, when they actually took down the building, so they had to mount all the charges all across the lower level, and sometimes even each or multiple levels at different interval. So they were saying after, after the charges it's set, then even after explosion, sometimes they're worried not all the charges actually set off, right? So some of them are actually still intact. So they're saying, well, instead of obviously sending people to check, which is dangerous, they want to be able to fly drones to actually do an initial assessment. So that's where a lot of those type of scenarios, and same thing as mining, as any kind of tunnel pipeline inspection, is where a full inside drone really comes in handy. And I went to see Helios 3 because I wanted to see, okay, a $50,000-$60,000 drone compared to Avata. What more does it do?
It's about the size of Avata?
No,
it's bigger.
It's much.
Okay,
it's much bigger.
I couldn't tell by the size of this. I'm like, one of this is. I'll pick this thing.
Because what was interesting to me is the drone actually has LiDAR. Because one of the things, anytime you fly inside, I would say 99% of the time, you're in the GPS denied environment, right? You don't have, especially if you're in tunnels, you're not going to have, GPS signal. And it's even challenging for you to get the signal between your controller to the drone if you have concrete and metal pieces in between. So that's where a fully protected drone with LiDAR comes in really handy. So Helios 3, the manufacturer was actually showing it was doing, I mean, they call it LiDAR 3D map, but essentially it's actually generating the live point cloud in real time. So you can actually know, based on laser beams, what's the environment around you. So you're not relying on GPS, you're not relying on visual. There are definitely interesting things you can achieve with this. I thought it was really impressive in terms of being in confined space, right?
Yeah. No, it's super interesting to see like these drones because they make a lot of sense for that kind of thing. And I kind of like I kind of want to just fly it at its full speed at a wall. Like every time I see somebody
They
flying
do have
close
a
in a
US
circle,
division. I'm sure they do demos.
I just want to fly.
the time.
I don't need a full demo. I just want to get one flying on my wall and then hand it back. I'm like, cool. That's all I wanted to do. The intrusive thought was finished, and now I'm complete.
Okay, the other product we came across this week is the Tundra drone. And one of my pilots actually found it because they wanted to do light painting, right? So I'm not sure if anyone has seen those
Oh,
light painting, photography.
that's kind of
Um,
cool.
so they were using a drone to fly a light from the air while they're using ground cameras, right, with long
Mm-hmm.
exposure to do the light painting photography, which looks really cool. So that's when my team found this product and asked me to get in touch with them. It works for Mavic 2 or 3, which I thought was really good for us because we still have several Mavic 2s. And if I'm just using the drone to fly a light, I'm not using the drone to film, right? This is almost like you're flying tripod, essentially, with a light. So we were thinking, it would actually be good because we don't fly our Mavic 2 much nowadays. So how do I still use it and make use of it? Right, so getting a light and putting a Mavic 2 seems like a good way to go. That way, you're utilizing the drones that you don't use its camera functions much anymore, but you can use it as a tripod for your flying light, right? So I thought that was interesting. And if you're like us, if you have a Mavic 2 sitting around, because you got the new Mavic 3 and Mini 3 like us, then maybe look into it. It is pretty bright, and if you look at there's a comparison right here, the before and after. Definitely, besides just light painting for public safety, right? Or if you are, let's say, the other scenario we're trying to set up after we get a demo unit is have Mavic 3 to fly and then have this to light, right, at the same time. That would be cool too. And I remember earlier days from filming, there was one project where we had to use the Alta 8 to carry a pretty big, light, almost like HMI, a pretty big film light. And there was a music video where they wanted the drone to carry the light to follow the artist throughout the music video, right? While they're using the ground camera to film, almost creating a spotlight. So just different concepts and different creative ideas you can achieve with that for sure.
Yeah, I have a friend who's in the drone painting, and he or light painting. He actually uses a drone for stuff, and he's done some really cool things with rocket launches down in Florida with them. And I'm sure he actually would be interested in something like this.
Yeah, we'll share more with you once I get our hands on the demo unit.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
So that's all the news we've got for you this week. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you back here next Friday.